Hey, let me ask you a question. Is reality fixed? Can it be changed? Is your reality the same as my reality? Imagine the possibilities. Such a large part of management is about exciting and stimulating your staff, getting them engaged to do more, use the skills that they've got to drive rather than just idle. It's a real skill. It's where you get the bang for the buck. We all try to hire the best people, and a big skill of management is getting the right people in the first place. But driving them is really important. Well, are we confined by reality? Imagine if we could change reality, change their reality. What sort of results would we get? I know, you think I've lost the plot, and maybe I have. And every so often you get these fads that come around that tell you that you can use your mind to change your reality. You can shape the physical universe by, meditating the right way. That's not what I'm saying. It's not what I'm talking about. I'm a bit more pragmatic than that and a bit more hard-nosed. But our realities are not the same. And I can demonstrate that. For a start, a lot of our reality is based on our senses. When I look out my window in the morning, I see green because I live in a foresty area and it's beautiful, lots of different shades of green. But the shades of green I see are different to the shades of green you would see, or my partner would see, or anybody else would see. Because all it is my own perception. Because we all have our own perception, our own way of viewing the world through our senses. Mostly we just get information. Imagine, if you will, that we were watching the world through a vignette, a funnel, a looking glass view into reality, only seeing a portion of it. There's a very famous experiment where you get a whole bunch of university students, I presume because they're cheap, not for any other reason, and you put a whole lot of them in red shirts and a whole lot of them in white shirts, and you put them into sort of a party environment, and then you take another group and you give them clipboards. And you tell the clipboard group that they're to observe and mingle in the party, but from just one side of the wall, and observe. And then you introduce a ball into the party and get the ball passed around. And the clipboard people are supposed to record how many times the people with white shirts pass or have contact with the ball. So they're busy doing that and they're shuttling it away. And you've probably heard about this experiment. A guy in a gorilla suit casually wanders through the party. Sort of thing that most people would take note of, if not a little bit of humour out of. 75%, about 3/4 on average. It varies every time they do the experiment, but it's always, much more than the half don't see the guy in the gorilla suit. That's because they weren't expecting to see the guy in the gorilla suit. But doesn't that say something about reality? 1/4 of those observers, people with a clipboard, have a completely different reality in relation to that party setting than the other 3/4. Gregory's visual assumption theory, not me, somebody that actually knows what they're talking about, Richard Gregory, a psychologist, believes that we see the world in a top-down view. In other words, we construct a picture of what we're going to see and then we see that. A little bit crude, but that's the general thesis of it. The general theory is that our brains are wonderful, powerful computational devices. They're quite amazing. They're self-programmed. They're even able to physically restructure themselves to our needs. They're liquid-cooled and powered by glucose and can really foot it with supercomputers. But they still have limitations, and they particularly have limitations in the amount of information that they can process in a timely fashion, in a time that we can make any judgments or assessments on that. An interesting thing is our brain, we think of our brain as one thing. But actually, we've got sort of like a number of different brains. Over the years, over our evolution, if you like, we've started off with a simple brain that allowed us to do simple stuff, recognize light and dark and emotions and be driven and hunt and that sort of stuff. And that's often called the reptilian brain. And we have it in common with a lot of other creatures. And then over the years, different layers have gone on top of that until we get all the way up to our neocortex, which is way more complex than most other creatures on the planet and does all our really algebra calculations and our thinking, our rationalization. Now, the thing that happens is down deep in the reptilian brain, things happen really quickly. There's a direct relationship between an input and an output. It's less computational and more networking and wiring. As you get further and further up, things take more and more time, and more parts of the brain, bigger parts of the brain, are involved in making decisions. So for us to think about sticking our finger against our head is much slower than all of the actions it takes to coordinate that, because they're handled by lower parts of the brain. So our brain is very efficient at freeing up our logical neocortex, if you like, and not overwhelming it with information that it needs to make judgments and assessments on. It filters it down. So it's assumed by a lot of psychologists that we only see about 10% or experience about 10% of our sensory input. About 90% of it just gets dumped. And it gets dumped on Gregory's theory, basically, of top-down processing. We know that already. It's going to be like that. We don't need to worry ourselves about thinking about that. Drop it. And we pre-program that into the lower areas of our brain to make sure that we don't get overloaded. Now, an interesting thing happens here. I said earlier that imagine if we looked at reality through a looking glass. We saw a vignette of reality. Well, in reality, we don't see a vignette. We see lots of little vignettes, pieces that are picked out for us, based on our programming, based on the filtering that takes parts in the lower parts of our brain. And that filtering is pre-programmed. So when we set up a whole lot of university students and we told them to look out for balls being passed around by the guys in the white shirts, then that's what they were looking for. They were involved in an experiment, and that, if you know, tends to focus you. I have a task. What do I need to do? How do I get this right? What are they gauging here? Are they gauging my intelligence? I need to make sure I do things right. So we focus, and we set up a set of conditions that mean gorilla working through the scene wasn't so important. In fact, wasn't going to happen, wasn't going to be there, we didn't see it. 75% of those students didn't see it. Their reality was really quite different, because their filters had already been set up quite differently. But here's the rub. What if that gorilla walking through the scene had been an opportunity? What if somebody was saying to you, blah, 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 over the drinks, I have this really cool idea and I think we might be able to set up a company and maybe we could start something, maybe it'll go somewhere. Who knows? Maybe we could call it, I don't know, Microsoft. But you weren't listening. You didn't even get it. It wasn't part of your reality. It was never there. You never had the opportunity. You missed it. In fact, you might have even taken out of it something completely different because that's what you were expecting. That's a pretty big rub in my mind. That's a pretty big side effect. Somehow we need to make sure we know what's going on with these filters, huh? So let's talk about cortexual filtering. And the reason I want to put a label on it and call it cortexual filtering is because that sort of assumes that it's something you pre-program. And once you've programmed it, intentionally or unintentionally, you're no longer getting the information that disagrees with that filter. It's not a choice. It's just a different reality for you. Now you might say, well, why don't we stop filtering? Just take in more information, maybe slow ourselves down so we can get more information. Well, slowing ourselves down does allow us to get more information, but trust me, we are always filtering. Always. We have to. It's a physical impossibility for that marvel that is our brains to cope with the information, the data stream that we get moment to moment. So we're always dropping about 90% of it. It's not a case of if we're going to filter or not. It's what the filter is. So the point I'm trying to make here is I don't believe we can change reality. We can change the physical world and conjure up things through our thoughts. But I do think the way we think and our perception, our expectation, perceptions, if you like, our cortexual filters define our reality. And I know that my reality is very different to your reality. Very different. And yours is different to everybody else's. It's very, very powerful. Incredibly powerful. Man, what an opportunity. Imagine if we could change those filters. Because up until now, we've been talking about, looking for a vignette, seeing a scene, our perception of what we take in. But it's way more than that, right? Because we act on that and we create a future. So we literally change our future reality by our perception and how we act on that. It's like that conversation, about maybe we should start a company. We've got this really cool idea. We could call it Microsoft. And if it passes you by, that's an opportunity that was really missed, right? Or Apple or something else. But if we heard it, your future goes off in a completely different direction. Same reality, nothing physical changing, no magic, just that 10% that we take in being the right 10%. If we could program that, if those filters that cut out the information that we didn't deem as relevant, that we didn't expect to see in our scene, imagine if we could program those, if there was some sort of language we could use, or an algorithm on a computer that we could use to program it. Well, there sort of is. In fact, there really is. We've already talked about that. I've told a story previously about how your happiness is in your future, and how you're going to have a dream if you don't have a dream come true if you don't have a dream. And if you plan, then that puts structure around the dream and starts to make it believable, and it's the future that you believe is going to happen is where your happiness comes from. And all of this is programming those filters. What you expect to see. In the original version of that story of your happiness is in the future, you sort of expect to get your winnings on a Monday, even if they don't come. But that's the key. You start to look and behave differently because of that programming. So my previous videos about where does your happiness come from, what's the difference between joy and happiness, how do you create a future and a plan, this stuff starts to program your filters already. But then, as you know and I know, we have this little voice in our head that goes off thinking other things all the time. And your staff do it too. We all do it. And I'll do a little video at some stage about, what is it about that voice? What is that voice in our head? Who is it that thinks when we're thinking about how we're thinking? That voice. And it's quite often negative. It's quite often dragging us down to another way and shutting off possibility for us, undermining us and putting in a new reality which we don't really want. It's not what we want there for ourselves, and it's not what we want there for our staff. So it's more than just create a plan. You've got to do all of that, and then you've got to start to follow that number one rule. And the number one rule, if you don't know, is beware what you allow yourself to think. Monitor what you think and justify it, check it, fact check it. Be that watcher in your mind. What am I thinking and why am I thinking that way? So that when the negative thoughts come up, see if they're real or actually if they're not. 9 times out of 10 they're not. They're just fear manifesting itself. We have this ingrown need to protect ourselves, have grown out of years, a millennium probably, of evolution. It's better to avoid something, but we can miss something altogether that way. So, how do we make sure that our filters stay programmed the way we want them to program? Well, you start off by building a plan, build a dream, get a vision, get people engaged in it, and then monitor how you and your staff think about that. Now here's the really cool thing. Really, really cool thing. And I suppose it's the point of this whole video in some ways. They say you catch more with honey than you do with vinegar. And you definitely put more positive filters in place, praising behavior and correcting behavior in a positive manner than criticizing and putting down. So, net, the whole sum of this video is we can change our reality. We can certainly change our perception which in time will change our reality. It'll change the path we're on through that reality that exists. We need to do that in a number of ways, but it's all about programming our filters. Positive messages, a positive direction, and a positive way to go forward, even when you're correcting something that's negative, that will build a filter that will give you, strangely enough, positive results.